Well, we have to now jump ahead and think about what NoteFlight does for us. Yes, you can print music, you can engrave music, you can do all of that. But now you have a tool on your iPad, on your Chromebook, on your Mac, on your PC, on your phone, that you can instantly create music and listen to what it sounds like. And I want to think about that process specifically, that notating music no longer does it have to happen after the musical idea is understood and after a bunch of theory is understood. We're going to do music theory in the next module, but I want to start with this idea of free creation, where the idea of we have to teach students what a scale is. We have to teach them what C major. We have to teach them what a 1 and a 4 and a 5 chord is. We have to set specified guidelines for composition, as Standard 4 told us. Instead, what we want to do is we want to think about how can I give students the ability to freely create, to play, to just use NoteFlight to make music, and in what the student perceives as an unstructured environment, yet we know is a structured activity that allows allows learning to happen. It's an interesting thing. Art, allow free creation to allow learning to happen, instead of, today we're going to learn about melody. Everyone's going to write a melody, and here's what a melody is. Instead, it's write 8 measures of something and just see what happens, and give the students the ability to freely create, and then from there pull out their melodic elements and then talk about how they use melody and open up discussions between the students and groups, assigning scores to different NoteFlight groups, whatever it is, in order for them to actually discuss and collaborate on what melody means based on something they've created. So let me go through some steps. The purpose of this lecture is to give you some ideas of how to take what you're working on in your performance ensembles and turn them into musical lessons that can happen in parallel with performance-based classes. So that's what I want to focus on now, and that's what your assignment is going to be, is to create 5 lessons that represent this. And then in the next modules, we're going to talk specifically about theory and composition, and then we're going to go on into performance assessment in Module 6. So in this module, what I want to do is really discuss how can we create music and how can we manage these musical activities in parallel to everything else we're trying to accomplish in our music class, which I know is a lot of time. So the first thing is we want to start with very short lessons. There's a myth that composition has to be a very long, laborious process, or a composition, a musical creation, the end result or the end product has to be some amazingly wonderful thing that gets performed and printed and the whole world looks at. In fact, we should start with very short lessons from the beginning. 4 measures, 1 melody, 8 measures, whatever it is. I also think it's something we get started with right away. So often we wait to integrate composition until the students have a handle on their instrument or can play certain scales, or we try to, again, music creation, it's just like learning to read and learning to write at the same time. We want to do these in parallel because they do support each other. So a lesson can be 4 measures in 5 minutes. It can be 8 measures, and they can scaffold. In the next module, music theory, we're going to talk about scaffolding assignments to create sort of strings of lessons that all grow in each other, similar to what the YCIW curriculum did in Module 3. So start with short lessons. The second one is build off what you have. So often music creation, we feel like it has to start with a blank canvas. And that's such a hard process of just create something, So we want to actually give students a basis around which they can create. Creativity in itself does not mean you're coming up with an idea that no one's ever had before. There's not a lot of original ideas left. Look at the movie industry. All they're doing is remaking the stuff from the 80s, right? So it doesn't mean it's not creative. So I want to take the idea of creativity. You have to do something that's never been done before, and I want to forget about that. Use what you have. In all of our performance classes, if we're using a method book in middle school beginning strings or band, we have tons of exercises. Why not take exercise 16 and write it out, and then add a second staff and write a counter melody? In this particular example, I would have students write out exercise 16 in their books, whatever that may be, or exercise 12. I'm just making this up. But in the second part, then I'd say add a staff and just write something that sounds good along with it. I don't need to talk about counter melody for an hour. I don't have to talk about melodic direction. I'm talking about any of that. We'll get to that in the next tip. I just want to say I've given them something they already have. I've had them write it to reinforce that exercise, and then I'm having take those exercises and just write something else just to explore using that material that you have. In choral, this is also, take the melody of what you're working on, take an accompaniment part, anything you already have in class, use that. In high school, we have, or even middle or high school, we have bandlit that's working on, find the melody, even our choirs, find the melody of the lit we're working on. Take that theme, if the theme variation, whatever it is, pull that theme out and say, everyone write out the melody, especially when you have a large ensemble piece where not everyone always gets to play the melody, or not everyone's sure who has the melody at what point, or what the melody is at a given time. You could either give the students the melody that's played between measures 8 and 24, or you could have them write it out or discover it or find it. And then from there, they could use that melody to create another harmony. They could try it in different keys. They could apply their own dynamics and articulations around it, whatever they want to do. But again, use what you already have as a basis. Students don't have to come up with musical ideas on their own. So we want to find ways to create musical activities that re-emphasize and reiterate and build on the rep we have in order to reinforce what we're trying to play. So the third kind of creation tip is we want to focus this around a skill. So we have short ideas, we're pulling from what we already have, and we're going to focus on a skill. But again, we're not going to go in skill forward and say, today we're going to work on counter melody. Instead, we're going to say, take out the 16 measure melody from this piece we're playing, and I want you to write the melody out, or you could write it out and give it to the students as an activity template, however you want to choose. And then you could have the students, okay, copy this into a second part in your musical score. Now, I want you to rearrange the notes on the second part so you create another line that sounds good with the melody. Just create something that sounds good. What that's going to force them to do is move notes around. And we've taken rhythm out, right? We don't have to mess with the rhythm. We're keeping the rhythm the same. We're just having the students change the pitches so that they can create a counter melody that works. And we're not going to explain harmony in thirds. We're not going to explain melodic shape or direction. We're just going to let and see what happens. And students will stumble upon contrasting melodic direction. They will stumble upon thirds and fourths and fifths because that's what's going to sound good to them. And then from there, we can open up multiple discussions based on what our students give us. And that's the type of lesson that becomes really exciting. So we focus this really on a counter melody exercise, but we've given the students the ability to freely create something and to play within a nice confined boundary of here's a 16 measure melody, keep the rhythm the same, move the notes around to whatever you want. And in fact, that doesn't take a whole lot of time for the students to do because you can see if they all have note flight and you share this activity template, they would just open it up and move the notes around. And then the discussion begins. So after those short activities, then we want to create, perform, respond, connect in every lesson. We want to make sure the learning happens in the feedback, it happens in the discussions, it happens when we dig deep and we ask students why they did certain things. Again, when students create, when you create opportunities for people to freely create uninhibited and they're willing to just open up and play, and that can happen when you give them assignments that are structured like the one I sort of made up, then they do amazing musical things. And students may not know why they've done it. Again, they've heard music their whole life. They know what this stuff sounds like, but the responding and connecting part, the real question is why? Why did you choose when the melody notes went up? Why did you choose to make the melody notes go down? And the student says, I don't know. So, well, it's contrasting, right? They may not realize they wrote a contrasting melodic line, but they know it sounds cool. And then you can dig into what that means and where have you heard that before? Why does that make you feel? Well, let's compare that to another student's assignment that wrote parallel melodic direction. How do these make you feel? How do these differ? And we have note flight. We can share all of these with groups and students can listen and hear and explore why these lines happen. And then that's where the learning happens. So often I see people that have assignments. And it goes back to this: I hand you paper, you write your name on it, you put the date, hopefully, and you finish it and you turn it in, and you never see that paper again, or you may get that paper back with some teacher notes in red ink or something. But we want to break out of that, the way that we went to school, and we want to think about, let's create this lesson. Let's let students play, and they can immediately explore and talk and open up discussions around that. That's where I think the learning really happens. And more importantly, we want students to know that anything they create is valuable and that it's okay to share it with every other student in the class, and everyone's going to get feedback, and it's going to be a positive and rewarding experience, and nobody is better or worse than anyone else. We're all creating, and we're all exploring, and we're all sharing ideas. Because again, that goes back to digital citizenship. And more importantly, to remember that when we teach music creation, just as when we teach performance, we are asking students to put themselves out there emotionally, to create something, to share it with everyone, and be susceptible to people talking about what they've created. And in a world of ugliness online and all of the things that are going on social media and the stuff that kids deal with every day, we want to create a world where students know it's okay to have an original idea, to have a creative idea, to explore, to freely create, and to share, and know that's okay. So I want to see lessons that not only incorporate, musical skills with the ability to freely create, but also include the follow-up of how it's going to be shared, how it's going to be discussed, and how we're going to talk about it. Similar to the way I've structured assignments in this course, where you will create your lessons, and then you will also share, you will critique people within your own groups, and then I'm going to look through and we're going to look at all those discussions, and that's where I think the learning takes place. I'm trying to cultivate the ability for all of us to learn from each other, and that's what I'd like to see you do with your students. And you could think about how this would look in an ensemble. And so, again, music creation in an ensemble setting, the type of lessons I'm looking at that we can incorporate in our music classes today without feeling the need to have a separate composition unit or a separate composition course. These could be, you have to pick a certain amount of time a week that students can do this. It can be 10 minutes a week. It can be 30 minutes a week. It can be, whatever you need it to be, but it doesn't need to be a lot of time. So even a lesson like this, we're going to start with having, in this case, I believe connecting is where music starts and creation is the second part, because we need to connect to personal meaning and have a reason to write something in a lot of cases. So this is one where I want students to pair up and talk to each other and get to know each other. This is great to do at the beginning of the year. Students, make new friends, however you're going to partner students up, whatever the case is there. So this could be 1 week of an assignment. This could be a piece of 1 week where students take notes. And then students are going to compose, in this case, an 8-measure melody for their partner based on what they're interested. And we're not going to talk about how and why, what to compose. We're just going to say, write some music that makes sound like your partner. And a lot of times you'll get, when partner likes dancing, you'll get music that's sort of fast and light and staccato, or a partner like, whatever it is. If their partner's feeling really sad because something happened, you'll get some sort of melancholy, long notes kind of thing. Students will write that, but we don't need to teach them why. What we want them to do is we want them to come up with it. We want to pull that out of them and then discuss. So we want to, and we can confine it. Again, depending on the level of your students, this could be 8-measure melody. This could be a 32-measure song with 4 parts. It's whatever melodic or musical area your students are, at whatever level they are, you can structure this middle piece. But more importantly, it starts with connecting. We're going to create an assignment. Then we're going to partner up and discuss why and how. We're going to present it and say, hey, you said you like dancing. So I wrote lots of fast notes because I thought this sounds like dance music. And then you can cultivate those discussions as much as you need. And then we're going to present it to the class. And again, this doesn't have to take away time from our ensemble rehearsal. In fact, this could be 6 weeks. You can do 30 minutes. You could do the pair up one day and you could get it started. Then the students could have 2 weeks to compose their melody. Then they could have a week to discuss. And then you could share, beginning of each class, three per class. You could just share 2 or 3 students' examples as you transition between pieces in a rehearsal, maybe at the beginning, maybe at the end after they pack up. You could spread this out. But what I'd encourage is some ongoing process of there's constantly music creation happening in a collaborative way that's integrated, within the the current process that we have for teaching music. Now, for your lessons, I want you to really stop at this. I want you to create 5 note flight scores, and I'm going to kind of break off and show you what this looks like real quick. So, for example, this is what that particular example I just gave would look like in note flight, and this is sort of what one of your assignments would look like. I'm a huge fan of catchy, fun, tongue-in-cheek, punny, whatever titles of assignments. I think it makes a difference to kids to do something that has a catchy name, even if it's cheesy, versus saying, we're going to do activity number 3 today. This doesn't have a lot of meaning, but again, that's up to you. I like creative names of lessons. So good practice in note flight, catchy lesson title. Subtitle could be more, definition of this, learning about each other through music, something there. But remember that the title of your piece is how it's going to show up in your note flight listing. So just if that makes a difference. Now, I used a prompt to add these instructions, which I would highly recommend. Text, show prompt, and then the prompt area shows up. The great thing about a prompt is you can, let me open up my prompt again. I can type I can keep typing, and it will actually format the score for the prompt. That's what I was trying to show there. So notice that it formats the score. If you use text or something like that, it's not necessarily going to do that. And notice it'll just pop back up. So here are your instructions on your score. It said 8 measures, so I gave them 8 measures. And this is as simple as that. This is a simple exercise. Gives instructions. I would, for our purposes, what you'll do is you'll create 5 of these, and you'll talk about, what the process is, very short instructions. And then what you'll do is you will make sure when you share it, and I put these in the assignment instructions, but since you're watching the video, you're going to create this in your own personal NoteFlight Learn site. And you all have access to everyone else's NoteFlight Learn site because that was what we learned in Module 2. So you'll go make sure all of your 5 exercises, you click share with all site members and keep this anyone can search browse to find it. And also put it in your Vandercook group, which I don't have a Vandercook group in my demo site right now. But you'll put it in that and then you'll save it. And that's all you have to do. And then you'll take the URL of your exercise and you'll post it in the discussion so that everyone in the discussion thread can click that URL, be taken to your site, and can give feedback. Do not save this as an activity template right now. We want everyone to comment and give feedback right on the score. So in fact, what you want to do is make sure you give, you're going to be able to comment on Schoology, so it's okay if you just give view permission, but if you want to give comment permission, that would also be helpful. So people can comment here. Comment here. Yay. So that's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to think for 5 exercises that you could use in your ensemble that, you can follow my lead on my tips. You can go off on your own if you want to. That's totally fine. But I want to make sure that they're short enough to be done within the time frame of everything else you're trying to accomplish. I want to make sure these exercises are focused on how long and how many parts and what they have to be. I want to make sure that there's an ability to create, respond, connect. There's a discussion response part of the instructions you give, and we don't have to go through it necessarily, but I want to make sure the lessons are structured for the ability to collaborate. And I want to make sure that they're structured in a way that allows students to freely create music, and then we can pull out the reasoning for what they freely created and how that all worked. A couple things about assessing creativity that I like to talk about. First of all, you're creating these little sandboxes, hence the adorable picture on this slide. Every student is going to have their little activity, and you've confined them to so many measures based on whatever prompt, but then they're going to freely explore. So you're differentiating instruction. You have to be okay with every student being in a different place. Again, as music teachers, we like to be on the podium, and we like everyone to follow the stick and follow our hands and do what we do and breathe and play in together. But in a music technology course, in a creation course, we have to let students freely create. And so many times we tend to structure lessons similar to being on the podium. Everyone's going to write this thing, or everyone's going to do this analyzation or this dictation, and everyone's going to end up with the same correct answers at the end. Flip that. In this particular case, every student's going to end up with different answers. And that's okay, because we've created opportunities for learning to happen. And when students discover contrasting melodic direction, when they discover what a major chord is, because their ears are going to gravitate to it, it has more meaning. When students write that stuff, then we just put the label on it. Now, I'm a big fan of assessment rubrics, and maybe later on this course we can sort of talk about assessment rubrics, but I want to mention, this is part of a professional development I did before, that the type of way we would assess this is similar to the type of feedback that I think you could give each other on your assignments. More importantly, obviously we're doing project-based learning. We want to make sure we assess the process and not the product. So the final assessment of some of these is not, is your melody good? Yes or no? But we want to think about, how do we get the whole learning process? The ability to, in the example I use, the ability to take from what a partner talked about and create a musical assignment, and then refine, and then discuss why musical elements fit certain personality traits, whatever that may be. Or in the other example I talked about earlier, and maybe when students take exercise 16 and write a melodic or a second melody to it, a counter melody, how did they come up with that counter melody? Why did they make certain decisions in certain ways? That's what we want to think about. We want students to reflect on the process. And we want to promote and encourage creativity and risk-taking. We've talked about this too, but we want to make sure that our lessons are structured in a way that encourages students to take a risk and try something new and have fun, instead of structured in a way that every student needs to find the right answer and you want every student to end up in the right place. Because in that case, students are not encouraged to freely create, and they're not encouraged to take risks as much because they're trying to find the answer you want. Instead, we want to create activities where they can find the answer that has meaning to them. And the trick is structuring that activity that keeps them all in a place where they're all working on counter melody, but they're going to devise and create their own counter melody in their own way, if that makes sense. Here's an example of a music creation rubric I've used in the past, and we can follow up more on the assessment part of these activities. But generally, the one thing I want to point out here is that I try to make my rubrics as positive as possible. It's difficult at level 1 to be positive sometimes, because a lot of times it's like, nope, you didn't do it. It's unrecognizable. It's just not correct. I'm sorry. But as we move forward, what we want is the information left to right to tell a story of what the student needs to do to get better. So this idea of, when I give feedback to students, I'm not going to say, you got a 3 because you didn't do the things in 4 or 5. Said, you're going to do, I want students to know you got a 3 at this element because this is what it looked like. And you can see that's the level. And if you want to improve, check out what's in 4. Check out 1-5. You can see how it's better. But it's this idea of positive feedback, especially because we're dealing with a music creation, not a math test that has a right and wrong answer. But the idea of your musical form, it was used okay. It did have some errors, but your piece is great. You had some errors in form. And then you can talk about how that grows, or you can look at it. But I just want to make sure that when we give feedback, the feedback is, here's where you are, and here's where that rates on a scale, and here's how to improve. And it's not, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, so you got this score. It's, here's what you did do, and here's how you're going to get better.